Jesus today is telling us a story, much like a master storyteller, a master educator, one who has seasons of education under his belt. Jesus is teaching his disciples here on the Sermon on the Mount all about discipleship. Discipleship is such an interesting thing. It's this idea of taking somebody and mastering them in our form, molding them in our form, mentoring them to follow what we believe and what we do. Discipleship is training people to be followers of Jesus in all things. Like a school has a process for training students from kindergarten through 12th grade, like a college has a process for training students from freshman to senior year, like graduate schools and postgraduate schools have processes for developing and molding students. Jesus as well has a process for developing and molding disciples. Matthew chapter 5 through 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew's gospel is actually arranged around 5 separate sermons, discourses, if you will. Matthew 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount, is the longest discourse that Jesus gives in the Gospels. It was done on the hillside of Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee with hundreds of his disciples, his followers around him. They were listening to his teaching. They were intrigued by his way with words, by the truth that he spoke, by the illustrations he gave. They were fascinated and enamored. But Jesus had a specific process for engaging his disciples and teaching them exactly what discipleship was. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 13, we will see that Jesus teaches his disciples to be the salt and the light. You know, I think it's interesting that Jesus uses these two metaphors. We'll see why, but let's begin by reading Matthew 5 and verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Jesus uses these two examples, salt and light, to demonstrate the importance of being a disciple. I want us to take a look at the example that he gives. I brought with me a salt packet. You can see it here, and there's salt inside, white crystals. They add flavor to so many things, to meat and vegetables, to crackers and pizza. You can do so much with salt that I know people put it in their ketchup to dip it in their fries. Salt is such a powerful mineral because it makes our tongue taste different flavors and things. It livens food. It provides so much. Jesus here uses this example of salt, and he says, if salt loses its saltiness, what purpose does it have other than to be thrown out and trampled underfoot? There's a number of different possibilities for what Jesus was highlighting here about salt. But most likely he had in mind the idea of salt, a mineral that's mined from the earth, that's found in other rock formations, and it was used to pack and preserve meat. And once that salt was done preserving the meat, it would be thrown out, cast aside, because it was no longer useful. You see, along with salt being a savory mineral, a mineral that provides flavor and life to food, salt can also be a way of preservation. You know that we can can foods, we can seal foods in vacuum packs, we can deep freeze foods and flash freeze foods and dry freeze foods, but you can also freeze or preserve foods with salt. You know, meat packed in salt, the moisture content is drawn out, and salt by nature is an antimicrobial mineral. So bacteria and viruses don't grow on it. It actually preserves food. There are cultures today, many East Asian cultures, that still preserve food by packing things with salt. Fish, for example. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, and even here in the United States, people would pack meats with salt, jerkies and pork belly and different things like that, because it would suck all of the moisture out and preserve that meat for later consumption. Jesus recognized, and it's true today, that the culture in which he lived was rotting and and decaying. The culture in which he lived and the culture in which we live is just slowly dying from the inside out. And what Jesus is asking his disciples here is such a profound thing. I want you to be salt. I want you to be a life preserver to your community. I want you to take the truth of who I am and give it to your community. Give back. Be that preserving agent to your community. But a second illustration that Jesus gives here is that of light. I find it really fascinating. He talks about taking a lamp and putting it on a lampstand rather than putting it under a bowl. I have here a lamp, an oil lamp from the first century. You can see it's pretty plain, and the history of oil lamps is quite fascinating. The technology that changed throughout the millennia is really unique. You can look up a history of oil lamps and see the open face lamps and the different types of lamps that were produced through the Bronze Age, the different ages, the Iron Age, and all of the different ages throughout history. You can see here a first century Roman oil lamp, and the design is quite plain. You see a circular structure with a large hole in the middle, a tip with a smaller hole that is where the wick would have been. So a person using an oil lamp like this would fill it with oil here, would put a wick at the end here and light the wick. And much like a modern day oil lamp, if you've ever seen an older maybe modern day oil lamp, that wick would draw the oil up into it and the flame would eat that and use it as fuel. Now, nobody purchases and uses lamps with the intention of covering them up. That would defeat the purpose. Nobody hides an oil lamp. Nobody lights it and then douses it so that it's useless. That defeats the purpose of an oil lamp. You see, Jesus is making the point here. A lamp is lit, it's filled and it's lit, and it's held up high on a lampstand in order to provide light for everyone in the home. An ancient Near Eastern home, a Jewish first century home, was smaller than our homes. So a lamp, an oil lamp, would provide light for the entire room, for the entire home. I think the illustration that Jesus is giving, these two illustrations that Jesus gives, are so very impactful. Are you salt? Are you light? Are you life-preserving? And are you light-giving? You see, a light not only provides us a way to get around, but it also gives us knowledge and information. It opens spaces that were once considered off limits. It helps us to keep from hurting ourselves and stumbling over things in the dark. Light takes away the darkness. And light is such an important tool. Salt and light. Are you salt and light? But what's the reason that Jesus encourages his disciples to be salt and light? Well, we see it here in the last verse, that people might see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. The entire purpose of being salt and light, the entire purpose of being a disciple, a follower of Jesus, is so that other people might see those good works and glorify God, who is our Father in heaven. That's the whole point. The Westminster Shorter Catechism asks, what's the purpose of mankind? And the answer is to worship and glorify him and enjoy him for eternity. You see, the point is we were created to give glory to God. And in becoming a follower of God, we are then purposed with the task of drawing others in to worship and follow the true God. Are you salt? Are you light? Do you spread the truth of who Jesus is to the world around you so that they might glorify God? Do you live every day at work, at home, at school, in the gym, at the grocery store, wherever you go? Do you live consistently as a follower of Jesus Christ so that people look at you and say, she's different, he's different. I know there's something different about him. I can tell there's something different about her. She must be a follower of Jesus. That's the point of being a disciple, to be that salt and light so God gets all the glory. But there's a second thing that Jesus points us to here in Matthew chapter 6. We see that people obey not so that they can become the center of attention, but so that God gets all the glory. Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 1, we read this: "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." It seems here that Jesus was combating a common practice in the day, or some sort of a practice during that day, where people would boast about the things that they do. You see, Jesus' comment here to not practice your righteousness in front of others isn't a command to stop putting offering in the offering plate because your neighbor might see you, or to hide what you give to other people so that nobody else notices. But rather what's emphasized here in verse 2, they do it to be honored by others. The point that Jesus was making is that when we practice righteousness, when we practice the things that God has called us to do, the obedience that God has called us to, giving and serving, loving, watching the things that we say so that we're not rude and crude and cruel and mean, watching our anger, making sure that we're not fighting and violent with each other, and watching our eyes and our minds so that we're not lusting and craving things that aren't ours. We are called to do all of those things in Scripture, and here Jesus is making the point. Not that you don't practice those in front of other people, but you don't practice those in front of other people with the intention of drawing attention to yourself. Let me restate that. Jesus doesn't want us to do things that are holy and righteous and good with the intention of saying, "Hey, look at me. Look at how good I am. You see how I speak? I don't say things like that. Oh, look at how much money I put in the offering plate today. Hey, everybody, I'm fasting right now. Hey, everybody, I'm going to go to prayer here in a minute." Right? We can all think of times when we've probably done something to draw attention to ourselves. You know, maybe you're the person who gives offering on Sunday morning, or gives to charities, or gives to nonprofits with the sole intention of getting a tax write-off. Right? That's such a selfish thing. Well, I'm going to give so that, I don't have to pay as many taxes. It's not so that I can help somebody or care for somebody. My first thought is it a tax write-off? Can I get that so that I don't have to pay so many taxes? Can I get a receipt for that so that I can make sure to give it to my tax preparer this year? You know, maybe some of you have really good intentions on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, but you post things about Jesus and God, not really because you want to make a difference, but because you want people to see how holy you are. Right? You want people to give you likes, and you want to have retweets and more followers on Instagram. Maybe your intention in doing good things is so that people look at you. Right? I remember when I was a high schooler in the praise team, I really struggled with this idea because I wanted to be the guy. I wanted to be the one up on the center stage. I wanted people to say, "Good job, Dan. Yeah, that's great. Way to go on that song." You know what? I never really stopped to think, am I doing this for God, or am I doing it for me? Yeah, I think that's a struggle for many of us, probably all of us. Jesus' encouragement here is we need to reconsider why we're doing what we're doing. Why are you living righteously? Why are you giving? Why are you serving? Why are you posting that comment on Facebook, Twitter, or that picture on Instagram? What's the point? Why are you giving that video up on TikTok? Why are you sharing this video? Is it so that people look at you and go, "Oh wow, look at how spiritual he is. Oh boy, she is a holy person. Oh man, I wish I could give like that. Man, he has so much to give. He has such a big heart. Wow, that's incredible." Or is it so that God gets the glory? Notice here that the point is, your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. It's not the intention to give for self-promotion, but rather to give for God promotion. Give for God's glory, not my own glory. Practicing righteousness is not so that other people give us praise, but so that God will be given praise. So the question that we need to ask, are you giving, are you serving, are you living for Christ in order to bring Him glory and not yourself glory? I don't know what that looks like for you. I know what it looks like for me, and I know when I'm struggling with pride and selfishness and doing things out of my own and for my own glory. It's when people come up and give me compliments after I preach or teach, those types of things. It's when I post something on Facebook, and I do this occasionally to get likes and to get thumbs up and to get comments. And I have to check myself every once in a while to make sure that I'm not doing it just for that, but rather to edify others and bring God glory. Because that's what a disciple does. He obeys, she obeys, so that God is praised. There's a third thing, though, that Jesus highlights here in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus' disciples are to live purposely. Starting in verse 19, we read this: "Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them." I want to pause here for a minute because we're going to get into some heavy stuff here in a second. Jesus gives two illustrations. The fruit tree that bears good and bad fruit, and a person who builds a strong foundation for their home. And then in the middle is this truth. And we'll get to the truth in a second. But I want to highlight this idea of a tree that bears fruit. You see, we all have experienced, I'm sure, either a garden at our home, our parents' home, or grandparents' home. You've gone to the orchard, you've picked fruit from the orchard, you've done the hay rides and seen all of the different trees. One thing you know, and I know from our experiences with agriculture, is that after a while, agricultural plants, trees, vegetation, it eventually becomes old, weak, and dead. We know that there are some trees that grow up and they end up being sterile. Maybe they don't get pollinated right and they don't produce fruit. They're just bad trees or bad plants. What do you do with those trees and plants? Well, you cut them down and you burn them. You throw them out, you let them compost. You get rid of them. They serve no purpose. And Jesus is making the point here that there are different types of trees in the world. And those who produce good fruit, those trees that produce good fruit, those are trees that are healthy and vibrant, and you want those trees. And you can recognize a healthy tree by the fruit that it produces. But there's a second type of tree, that's the one that doesn't produce. And an unhealthy tree is recognized by the fact that it produces either unhealthy fruit or no fruit at all. And that tree needs to be cut down and burned up. Which leads to the truth then. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?" Then I will tell them plainly, "I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers." Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house upon the rock. The truth here, following the illustration of the tree, is that there are people out there who are trees. They are apple trees or fruit trees of some sort, maybe a peach tree or a pear tree. For sure, they're trees. But they don't produce fruit in keeping with the type of tree that they are. You see, an apple tree needs to produce apples. And an apple tree that doesn't produce apples is useless. It's cut down and destroyed. A peach tree needs to produce peaches, and a peach tree that produces peaches is vibrant and healthy and growing. And we use that tree and we love that tree and we want that tree. There are people in the world who claim Jesus. They claim to be apple trees. They claim to be peach trees. They claim to be followers of God, but the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. The fruit is on the tree. And people who don't produce fruit are people who are really not believers in Jesus at all. It's a very hard truth for us to grasp, but the reality is Jesus says there are some who will come and they, "Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we cast out demons in your name? Didn't we do miracles in your name?" And he will tell them, "Depart from me, I never knew you." You see, outward change doesn't necessarily demonstrate inward change. Outward compliance doesn't necessarily indicate inward change. I can make my children go clean their room, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily want clean rooms. I can make my kids pick up the floor, eat their food, do those things. I can force them to do that. But that doesn't mean that their inner will has changed. It only means that I am strong enough in my authority to make them do what I want them to do. What Jesus is asking for is an outward compliance. It's not, hey, just do this because I'm asking you to. It's an inward change. When my child eats his food or cleans his room on his own volition, of his own accord, of his own will, then I know that his life is truly changed, right? That it's his inside that's wanting him to do this, not just me making him comply. Jesus is calling for disciples who have inward life change, not external compliance. I don't know what you're like at home. I don't know what you're like at the store. I don't know what you're like at school or at work. I don't see you in all of those places. And my guess is your family doesn't even see you in all of those places. Your friends may not see you in all of those places. There's only one person who knows what you're like in all of those places, you, and a second, God. I think there's something important here for us to grasp, and it's this concept that you need to evaluate the kind of fruit you produce. Are you living a life of change, of humility, of love, of obedience to God? Not so that you can get the glory, but so that He can get the glory. Are you that life-changing force in the community? Do you care for your neighbors and your family and friends? And I'm not talking about doing it so that people give you glory and accolades, but rather so that God is glorified. Are there times in your life when you go, I just need to do this because I want to honor and serve God? Right? If your heart desires God and is seeking God and chases after God, that demonstrates inner life change. But if you simply show up to church on a Sunday morning and say, check that one off the box. You pray on a Tuesday night because, I need to mark that one off. You serve at some event because, I know I need to serve too. Right? That doesn't demonstrate inner life change. Now it can, but if you're just checking off boxes to check off boxes, right? That's outward compliance. God is calling people, Jesus is calling His disciples to have inner life change. I know these verses are really, they can really trip up our minds. And my goal today is not to tell you that you're not saved. That is not my goal at all. But to really evaluate, are you producing fruit? And if you're the type of person who says, boy, that's a really good question, am I producing fruit? My next remark to you would be, that demonstrates inner life change. If you're the type of person who's listening to this and I'm asking whether you are producing fruit and you go, why does it really matter? Right? That's a dangerous place to be, right? Be reflective, think retrospectively on your life and evaluate, are you inwardly changed by Jesus' work in your life? Or are you just an outwardly compliant person? As a kid, I was an outwardly compliant person. We had kind of a joke in my family that, things would go in one ear and out the other, right? I would listen to everybody and nod my head and, and then go do what I wanted to do. I was the quiet, rebellious child. I did what I wanted, when I wanted, and I would ask people for advice, listen to their advice, and then ignore their advice. And I still struggle with that today. And that's just part of who I am, and I work with that, and I work on that, and I try not to be that person. But that outward compliance, it doesn't demonstrate an inner change. Inner change comes when I'm told to do something and I say, you know what, I need to do that because it's right, not because I'm being forced to. Evaluate your life. Are you salt? Are you light? Do you obey Jesus because it's convenient for you, because it brings you glory? Because you're doing it to give God glory? And are you producing fruit in keeping with a believer of Jesus? The book of Galatians is a great place to go. Galatians chapter 5, where Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, long-suffering, self-control. All of those things are the fruit of the Spirit. And if you can adequately say, not adequately, that's a strange word, but if you can say, yeah, you know what, I demonstrate these, I show these in my life, then you're producing fruit in keeping with the Holy Spirit and Jesus' work in your life. If you look at that list and you say, I don't demonstrate any of these. As a matter of fact, I'm actually probably more like the list that follows after it, the vice list. And I'm malicious and slanderous and violent and angry. And I have all of these things. Then consider your relationship with Jesus and where you need to be. Talk these things over with your life group. If you have questions, you can ask your life group leader, talk with your life group, and even talk with one of the pastors at the church. We'd love to connect with you and help you through your journey of faith. It's one of our DNA values here to help you on your journey of faith, to help you grow wherever you are, to become a better disciple of Jesus.